In earlier times, people would have called it having a night on the town. In this case, the party usually lasted from lunchtime to early morning. However, the town referred to, no one would be shocked to learn, was Las Vegas. The year was 2039, and the venue was the last digital gamble among Vegas establishments. It was called the Bit.C Fortune Maker Casino on Flamingo Road. The local inhabitants called it the Bit.C. There had been plenty of other Bitcoin casinos in many countries, but the Bit.C Fortune Maker Casino was the last of them to exist in physical form. Many attendees felt excited about visiting this particular casino, eager to mention it to friends back home. The name itself didn't strike them as ironic. However, those who understood the irony stayed away. When they felt like gambling, they would simply buy a scratcher ticket at their local gas station. Losing $2 was far less painful than losing much more in a field of electronic wizardry. The casino worked on one principle: you could only gamble with Bitcoin. No chips, no plastic cards, no credit lines. There was a complex array of Wi-Fi and other specialized local area networking which allowed that to happen on the premises. If you didn't have any Bitcoin on the blockchain, you could buy some over the counter. If you had neither a wallet with passwords nor any Bitcoin, you could purchase both. In either case, customers were charged a fee which added up to a major revenue stream for the casino, aside from the profits made from the gambling tables. Bitcoin has 19 unit names, from the Nakamoto, which is 1 million Bitcoins, to the Nak, which is 1/1000th of a Bitcoin. Some of these names seemed confusing, but you either learned them or you didn't gamble at the Bit.C Fortune Maker Casino. More than that, the house had rules that its customers had to follow. It wasn't the place for minuscule wagers. The lowest accepted bet was a Bitcoin cent. So, the minimum a customer could currently play with was 1/100th of a Bitcoin. By June 2039, after a decade of its usual wild gyrations, Bitcoin's price had surged again, reaching $274,900. Inflation had come and gone in great waves since the 2020s, lifting the average price of a loaf of bread to $34 in a suburban convenience store. People adjusted. They always do, even though their wages often fall behind. So, at this time, the lowest bet accepted by the casino, the Bitcoin cent, was worth about $275. The casino's customers had changed too. Most early Bitcoin investors, those who bought before the March 2024 peak of $104,000, had long since sold their hold, which they deliberately misspelled as their hodl. They had diversified, passed their assets on to their heirs, or simply cashed out to enjoy a quieter, more stress-free life. What remained was a new breed of Bitcoin owners, younger, brasher, convinced they understood macroeconomics better than the central bankers ever could. They no longer saw Bitcoin as a store of wealth. It was a high-stakes game like those they played in the casino. The rogue waves, riptides, and destructive tsunamis of global finance lifted them, dumped them, and sometimes drowned them. For many, their confidence, which some would call arrogance, didn't last long. When inflation soared in 2031, the Federal Reserve hiked rates by 175 basis points in just 9 months. When inflation steadied and then sagged in 2033, the Fed kept rates painfully high for too long. As usual, liquidity shrank and demand fell. Consequently, Bitcoin collapsed to $22,000. Disillusioned and poorer than they had expected, many of the new breeds swore they would never touch it again. 8 years later, most people had no idea whether Bitcoin was rising or falling, or what its price was. They didn't know that it had reared up towards $275,000. Possibly, they didn't care, which is why, on a warm June afternoon, the Bit.C Fortune Maker Casino was packed with people who did not know what they were gambling with. Another potential customer stood on the sidewalk waiting to be joined by his 2 friends. Jonah Redland stared at the glittering entrance. He was smiling nervously. He had never owned Bitcoin. He had never gambled more than $20 on anything, but he had come to Vegas for a bachelor weekend, and when his 2 closest friends insisted on visiting the landmark casino on Flamingo Road, he didn't protest. Charlie slapped him on the back, saying, "You only live once." Saul laughed. "Besides, We're only here to watch, right? But that wasn't how their visit unfolded. Once they passed through the main entrance, the casino's psychological reward-linked stimuli took control. The interior design, the decor, the alluring music, and the bright lights forbade any thoughts and feelings other than, let's take a risk. Within 10 minutes, Charlie persuaded Jonah to convert $1,100 into bitcoins. It wasn't much, but at least he now had a digital wallet and a set of passwords supplied by the casino. The conversion fee stung a little. It added $110 to his tab, but Jonah told himself it was part of the experience. He would recoup it in no time. With the new wallet in his pocket, he felt different, less fearful, a little prouder. As though directed, they headed to the roulette tables in the casino pit. Jonah tentatively placed his first bet. It was 1 cent of Bitcoin on 18 red. He knew it was high risk. When the croupier spun the wheel clockwise and threw the little white ball counterclockwise, something miraculous happened. Jonah won. The croupier used his rake to push twice the amount of Jonah's stake towards the astonished young man, who smiled a little madly. Charlie and Saul cheered and clapped. Jonah bet again. He won again. Charlie urged him on. "You're on fire. Press it a little more." Against his better judgment, Jonah did so. Within half an hour, his digital balance had soared to 9 Bitcoin cents, which was worth almost $2,500. Hearing the cheers, other people began gathering behind Jonah, Charlie, and Saul, watching with increasing excitement. Something seemed to attract the croupier's attention. His lips tightened. He frowned for a moment. He surreptitiously pressed a button under the table with his right foot. That triggered a warning to his manager, who was in a distant room observing the live images streamed in by cameras set in the ceiling above 5 tables in the pit. It wasn't long before the manager arrived and drifted towards Jonah's table. He was a tall, very thin man with a gaunt face. He was wearing a loose, dark blue suit. Edging between the onlookers, he was polite, smiling, and unobtrusive. But he had the eyes of an eagle. That was when Jonah placed a bet that changed everything. He placed all his winnings onto 29 black. The casino staff call it an all-in. The wheel spun. The ball danced. Then, it settled at 5 red. Jonah stared in disbelief. The sighs from the crowd around him said it all. Jonah exhaled slowly. His shoulders sagged. Then, something strange happened with the wallet in his pocket. It trembled, and a soft alarm hummed. Perplexed, Jonah pulled the digital wallet from his pants pocket, and its screen lit up. There was a message, something about an incoming transfer. Then, the message was replaced by another. It read, "Received 50 BTC." He blinked. He now knew about Bitcoin's value. That transfer was worth over $13 million. Leaning over his shoulder, Charlie asked, "What's that?" Jonah shrugged. I don't know," the manager noticed. His gaze flicked across to the croupier, who subtly nodded. Another notification arrived, accompanied by a buzzing sound. "Return previous deposit immediately. Sent to the wrong address." Jonah swallowed hard. Someone, somewhere, had sent him millions of dollars by mistake. Saul stared at the screen. Charlie whispered, "What are you going to do?" Jonah shrugged. "Send it back, of course. Once I know how to do it." That was when the manager leaned in behind Jonah and whispered in his ear, "Please step away from the table." Jonah's heart thudded. He looked up and saw 2 security officers positioning themselves a few yards distant on his left and right side. The manager edged even closer and whispered again, "Sir, please come with us." Shocked, Jonah looked the man in the face. "But I didn't do anything." The manager glanced at the screen on Jonah's wallet. "We know. That's why we'd like a word." Charlie and Saul stood frozen in surprise and confusion. In a moment, the manager and the 2 guards had escorted Jonah away through a nondescript door in a wall. They paced down a long, featureless corridor while the pit staff distracted their customers with a new opportunity at the blackjack tables. The manager opened a door to a quiet, windowless office. He gestured to a chair beside a desk, and Jonah sat down. The manager shook Jonah's hand, saying, "I'm Martin Kiever. I manage the blockchain security here." He pressed a few buttons on the computer's keyboard, and the screen flashed into life. It displayed the casino's blockchain activity in real time, which included hundreds of small transfers and one that was enormous. He turned the monitor so that Jonah could see it. Jonah stuttered again that he had done nothing wrong, but Kiever dismissed his claim with a wave of his hand, saying, "Relax, you're not in trouble. However, the person who sent that transfer is..." Jonah frowned. "They said it was an accident." Kiever shook his head. "No large transfer like that is a mistake. It was an attempt to launder funds through you. The sender assumed you'd send it back, or that you'd panic and run off with the money. Sending it back would launder it. Running off with the money would make you their target. And they take no prisoners. When you didn't do either, it triggered our alert." Jonah's head was spinning. "So, what happens now?" Kiever tapped a few commands into his computer, then said, "Check your wallet." The screen on Jonah's newly issued wallet indicated that the transferred funds had vanished. Kiever smiled. "Before you ask, we traced your entire digital footprint the moment you stepped inside our building. You're clean. In fact..." He stopped when a message suddenly flashed up on his computer screen. He chuckled. "The criminals chose to accept the return of the funds, and they've logged out instantly." Kiever turned back to Jonah. "Honesty is rare in this building. It's so unusual that we reward it. We'll send the record of these events over to the financial crime section of the Las Vegas police. You are not the first victim. Somehow, these criminals have hacked into our system, and they know precisely who to target, someone who has lost everything. We want to stop this from happening to our customers, so we have provided a small gratuity to you for your assistance." He pointed to Jonah's wallet. Jonah blinked. The screen showed 20 Bitcoin cents, which, he soon calculated, was worth $5,500. Kiever winked. "That's our thanks for your trouble." When 2043 rolled around, the BitC Fortune Maker Casino was begging for customers. Bitcoin was worth $8,300 and was rapidly sinking. It was no longer a fashion statement to be seen at the casino on Flamingo Street. Jonah, now married with a baby girl and another little one on the way, kept the 20 Bitcoin cents. It wasn't an investment, but was rather a reminder. In 2045, when the street reported that the BitC Fortune Maker Casino was closing, Jonah read the headline, smiled, and shook his head. Maybe the hackers had won in the end. Maybe the collapsing Bitcoin price dragged the casino down. Maybe Bitcoin's time was over. But Jonah had won more at the casino by accident than most people ever did by trying their luck. It was the end of an era. But for Jonah, it had been the start of a better one.